Having all the times around you, now you got me feeling like starting a new life now. Even when I leave, I can see your rest, carrying my own girl. It's crazy how I feel about you. Yeah, it's crazy how I feel about you. Let me take you down to my hometown, girl. Every day I dream about the man you were. You know how I feel. I will love you every day. Let me take you down to my hometown, girl. Every day I dream about the man you were. You know how I feel. I will love you every day. Hey, 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 hey. I will love you every day. Hey, 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 hey. Ever since I met you, girl, I've had a change to be the kind of man that you wanna take. So I'm having that for you. It doesn't matter where I go, I'm already yours. Everybody else, I don't wanna know. It all comes down to you. Having all the times around you, now you got me feeling like starting a new life now. Even when I leave, I can see the rest. Carrying my own girl, crazy how I feel about you. Yeah, it's crazy how I feel about you. Let me take you down to my hometown, girl. Every day I dream about the brand new world. You know how I feel. I will love you every day. Let me take you down to my hometown, girl. Every day I dream about the brand new world. You know how I feel. I will love you every day. Hey, 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 hey. I will love you every day. Hey, 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 hey. I will love you every day. Hey, 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 hey. I will love you every day. Hey, 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 hey. I will love you every day. Let me take you down to my hometown, girl. Every day I think about the man you were. You know how I feel. Well, I will love you every day. Well, let me take you down to my hometown, girl. Every day I think about the man you were. You know how I feel. Well, I will love you every day. Well, let me take you down to my hometown, girl. Every day I think about the man you were. I will love you every day. Hey, 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 hey. Going around the world and leaving content. Money on my mind, not anything. Ladies by my side each and every day. And I'm always back to you. And having all the times around you, now you got me feeling like starting a new life now. Even when I leave, I can see your eyes staring in my own girl. It's crazy how I feel about you. Yeah, it's crazy how I feel about you. Let me take you down to my hometown, girl. Every day I dream about the brand new world. You know how I feel. I will love you every day. Let me take you down to my hometown, girl. Every day I dream about the brand new world. You know how I feel. I will love you every day. Hey, 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 hey. I will love you every day. Hey, 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 hey. Ever since I met you, girl, I've had a change to be the kind of man that you wanna take. So I'm having that for you. It doesn't matter where I go, I'm already yours.
Okay, I think we should get started, and hopefully people will continue joining in the next few minutes. But I just want to first start off by thanking everyone for joining the Stopty Partnerships Virtual Innovation Spotlight. For those who do not know me, my name is Jackie Ha, and I'm the head of the External Affairs and Strategic Initiatives team here at the Stopty Partnership. So we have an exciting program for you today. As some of you might know, the Stopty Partnership will be partnering with Bamboo Capital Partners, one of the leading impact investors in this space, to launch the HEAL Fund, a venture capital fund for TB, COVID-19, and across communicable and non-communicable diseases. I will let our speaker today, Dr. Stuart Bennett, who's a senior advisor at Bamboo, to dive into the 5 W's, the who, the what, the why, and the hows in a few minutes. But before we dive into the program, I just want to go over a few housekeeping matters. The Virtual Innovation Spotlight is being recorded and will be made available on the Stopty Partnerships website in the coming weeks. During the discussion, except for our fabulous speaker, please keep yourself muted. During the Q&A session, please use your raise hand function to request the floor. Before you ask your question, please provide your name and affiliation so that we can get to know you better and become friends. Last but not least, feel free to share your insights during the discussion via the chat box and or your social media accounts. And please be sure to tag Stopty Partnership and Bamboo Capital Partners. So before we dive into the program and I give the floor to Stuart, since some of you already know that I really love quizzes and tests, and don't ask me why, I'm sure I need some therapy for that. We have a 1-minute challenge for everyone. And the challenge is, when you hear the phrase venture capital, what is the first word or thought that pops up in your mind? So feel free, don't be shy. Feel free to just enter your reaction in the chat box, because we'd really like to know what comes to your mind when you hear this phrase. Money, yes, money. Anyone else? Equity investments in startups. Wow, that's very sophisticated. Startups, stressful, 25%. Okay. Any other reaction from the group? Risk. Unicorns, exciting. Okay, fantastic. So Stuart, I don't know, this is the audience member and their views on venture capital. So either you have a lot to convince them that venture capitalists are not bad people and venture capital's funding is not bad. But here's the reaction that we're getting from some people. Okay, so without further ado, I wanted to give some introductory remarks, but I think Stuart could do a better job in telling us all why we're here today and why I think what we're trying to do is critical. So Stuart, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jackie. The customary "can everybody hear me" question, first of all. I assume you can, so I will carry on. And I think Raphael is the able assistant. So please, if I need to push the slide, I'll ask, but otherwise just, I think you know the flow. So thanks very much, Jackie. Thanks everyone for joining. A very quick brief on my own background. I'm a physician by background and training. I practiced for 10 years in emergency medicine. I moved to the finance and business side more than 10 years ago. And pretty much all of that time has been spent both operating and investing in businesses across emerging markets, specifically in healthcare. So I've worked for a number of private equity firms. I've also been an operator. I have a kind of day job, as well as my work, which I do with Bamboo, which is to run a hospital group. And I've lived and worked across pretty much every geography where we're investing. So that's what excites me about this whole venture that we're doing. And just want to say thank you for Jackie and the entire Stop TB team for their support in this event, and also their partnership with regards to this fund. So a little bit about Bamboo. So Bamboo Capital Partners is exclusively an impact investor, been around since 2007, has done many funds and many investments, initially starting off very much in the impact heavy space, less commercial investing. And now we're a little bit more balanced in terms of doing investments which have significant impact, but also commercial returns, and offices around the world. Next slide, please. Yeah. So as you can see, we started off very much in impact private equity, and primarily focusing on energy, financial inclusion, and healthcare. Over time, that has evolved into many other funds. In terms of all of the funds within the SDG 500 platform, which I will talk about, we are approaching this from a blended finance perspective. So as I'm sure many of you are already aware, right, the benefits of blended finance in the way that we are doing it is really for, at least for all of these funds which we're looking at, for every dollar which is invested from essentially first loss capital, we are layering commercial capital on top of that, which I will explain a little bit more later. But essentially that gives some downside protection for the commercial investors, but it also allows the development finance effectively to mobilize a significant additional amount of commercial capital to achieve the end goals, which gives us, as I said, some risk protection, but also it effectively catalyzes everything we do with the rest of the commercial capital. In terms of how we are looking at things differently, I mean, my background of investing in healthcare in these markets has previously mainly been on the infrastructure side, so building hospitals, building medical centers, supporting primary care ventures. There haven't been many funds that have specifically focused on technology. And to be honest, the HEAL Fund was conceptualized even before COVID started, but COVID is a perfect use case, I would say, as to why technology can really be transformational within healthcare. It also allows in many senses, us to leapfrog old traditional models of healthcare service delivery. And one of the primary aims of the HEAL Fund is to see how we can learn better from some of the developed markets and avoid the same mistakes we've made in developed markets to achieve much better healthcare transformation in developing economies. And obviously it's an impact fund. I will talk a little bit later about how we're measuring impact and how we're thinking about impact, but every single investment has to be an impact investment, otherwise it will not sit in this fund. So I'm probably teaching everybody to suck eggs, so I'm not going to spend too long on this, but there are massive healthcare challenges, as we all know, in frontier markets and low middle income economies, right? Apart from the basic access to healthcare, there's a significant challenge in funding healthcare, right? Both at the public level and even more so in the private level. There's also a huge out-of-pocket expenditure burden, right? The vast majority of people in these markets have no way to fund healthcare. In many cases, it can result in catastrophic healthcare costs where entire families are bankrupted due to a single disease process or a single surgery, let's say. And the people who are most at risk from healthcare are also most at risk from the financial impacts of healthcare. So we're doing our best to try and alleviate that. The other point is with regards to non-communicable diseases. The challenge is NCDs are still traditionally seen as lifestyle diseases or diseases of the rich, right? And one statistic which is still a fact and still true is that non-communicable diseases kill more people in low middle income economies than HIV, TB, and malaria combined. Right, so that's a significant issue, and that is why, although we are, looking at communicable diseases very, very strongly with this fund, we cannot exclude NCDs. And again, using COVID as a use case, COVID has really shown us all that underlying non-communicable diseases can have a significant impact on patients that are getting COVID-19. And the vast majority of the mortality that we've seen are in patients that have pre-existing non-communicable diseases. So the interplay between NCDs and communicable diseases is well known. And again, that is why this fund and this venture is very much disease agnostic and attacking both communicable and NCDs. So, to further emphasize the point, constrained funding we've discussed, I think fragmented technical support is very important. There are many silos still in our markets, right? There are many people who are doing, phenomenal work. Many of you that are on this call, I'm sure, are running companies or involved in companies which in their own independent domain are doing fantastically well, but connecting the dots, getting people to talk to one another, getting the public and the private sector to work together is very, very challenging, right? And it is a very complex market, right? It's not easy to do business in any of these markets. And many of the multinational organizations have tried and failed, right? Many of these organizations have tried to take, very smart technologies and value engineer them down to a price point which makes sense in these markets, but it's very, very challenging. And that's one of the things we will talk about further on the slides. So SDG 500 is essentially a $500 million /euro, more or less the same these days, platform, which is specifically designed to target the SDGs, right? Sustainable Development Goals. Within each, there is always a UN type of partner, right? In our case, it's the Stop TDB Partnership. And specifically with regards to HEAL, we are focused on healthcare only as a sector, but we are geographically a little bit more agnostic. Other funds are geographically specific and sector agnostic, so they can invest across multiple different sectors. But what is unique and different about HEAL is we are, number one, a pure equity fund. There's no debt financing. And we're the only fund out of the 3 tech-focused funds that is domain-specific. So we only invest in healthcare or healthcare-related companies. Together, combined, all of the funds follow the same format where minimum of 20% of the capital in the fund is essentially catalytic first loss capital, traditionally government financed or financed from institutions or foundations, etc. That does not mean that it's money which will be burnt, right? It means it's money which doesn't necessarily attract the same commercial return as commercial capital, but the intention is certainly to return that capital and to allow it to have a consistent catalytic effect. So I think I've already mentioned most of this. Again, the unique thing with HEAL is we are a hybrid venture capital private equity fund. And by that, I mean, we are taking a venture capital approach with regards to the size of the investments and the stage of the investments. So we can invest a little bit earlier than traditional private equity capital. We can reduce the size of the investment. The maximum investment we will do will be $5 million. The minimum would probably be, between $500,000 to $1 million. We could potentially go slightly lower, but it's unlikely. But we are targeting earlier stage investments, so Series A, Series B. And that means that we can afford to have a portfolio of around 20 companies plus, right? It means we will take minority stakes in those companies. We have no intention to take board control and try and pretend we can run 20 companies. It's not feasible. We will take minority stakes, but we will provide a lot of additional bandwidth to the management teams. And when it comes to impact, I think there's 3 most important points. I think point number 1, we're very focused on hard impact criteria. And as an example, if we invest in a diabetes company or a company that's focused on diabetes, one of the impact KPIs could be the proportion of diabetic patients who have achieved a therapeutic HbA1c level, who have their blood sugars under control in a clinical setting that can be validated and proven, rather than relatively soft impact KPIs. We will have softer impact KPIs, the number of patients that are served, the number of professional workers which are developed, etc. But we're very much focused on the hard impact KPIs, and they have to show that by achieving those KPIs, we actually meaningfully change people's healthcare service delivery. I think the second point is we're not trying to create a separate set of impact KPIs where we have to have a separate MLE team, a dedicated team of impact professionals who are going around and exclusively monitoring the impact KPIs. We are trying to work with management teams to have KPIs which actually are relevant to the business, right? And therefore, by delivering the KPIs from a business or a commercial perspective, they are also delivering a significant amount of impact, and vice versa. What that means is that we're not bogging down the management companies, the management teams of these companies, with very cumbersome reporting on a quarterly basis. We are just siding things alongside what they should be doing as a successful and good management team and reducing their burden. And I think the final point is every investment that we are looking at has to go through an impact committee, right? We have a very, very well-experienced gentleman called Sir David Nicholson, who used to run the UK National Health Service, who is the head of our impact committee. And every deal has to go through the threshold of the impact framework first before we can conclude a deal commercially. In terms of how do we do things differently, or how are we trying to do things differently? One example is that many of these companies have a fantastic technology advantage. They have a fantastic product. They have good customer base. You know, they are maybe approaching profitability and they're approaching traction. But one of the unique things about our team, right, and one of our team, Alan, is actually on this call as well, who's highly experienced in the commercial space. We have advisors within our team who have direct experience in taking what I would call nascent technology through the entire life cycle of, you know, an early stage company which has market traction, which has a customer base, which maybe is approaching profitability, and then taking that all the way through to successful exit or acquisition or strategic partnership. And by that, I mean, you know, a multinational medical device company, for instance, may want to partner with that company to grow it into new markets, or may want to take a strategic stake, right? We also have many advisors who specifically have domain technology expertise, either in communicable diseases or non-communicable diseases. And part of the real benefit of dealing with, you know, the Stop TB partnership is that we have much wider grasp of these markets. We have much wider network in these markets. And actually 2 or 3 of the investments we're currently looking at as our first investments have actually come through our partnership with Stop TB. They are companies that originated with TB as a use case in mind, but they have broad applicability across a number of different disease processes. And so, you know, through our partnership with Stop TB, we've been able to enrich our pipeline, and I think we will continue to do so going forward. Again, I don't want to talk too much about all the challenges. I think everybody on this call is aware, right? But I'll talk about this mainly because it defines how we are shaping our portfolio, right? One of the biggest challenges in our markets is a massive shortage of workforce. And by that, I mean deep sector expertise. You know, if you look at Nigeria, sadly, 90% of you know, all newly qualified doctors, it's starting to change, but you know, historically, 90% of all new qualified doctors leave the country, right? Which means that you may have a lot of GP doctors, but you don't have as many specialists. Many of them go to the US, they go to the UK, they leave the country. Similarly, with regards to specialist nurses, there's a significant paucity of ICU trained nurses in sub-Saharan Africa. There's slightly more in in South Asia, but also there's a significant lack of, let's say, respiratory therapists in all these markets. So one of the angles which we're taking with the fund, which I'll talk about, is trying to backfill for the lack of available trained and skilled and super skilled workers by taking less skilled workers and equipping them with devices and technology and software solutions which enable them to operate at a much higher level, and over time will enable them to upskill and to train as if they had the qualification in the first place, right? One of the other issues is around, I would say, systematic and well-structured healthcare data, right, which is a massive challenge in our markets. I have worked in Nairobi in the last few years, and I remember having a long conversation with a Ministry of Health doctor who told me that part of his challenge with setting the budget for the next 3 years was knowing where to send the money, right? Because they just don't have data. They don't know which diseases really are coming through the door. They have some anecdotal evidence, but without a significant database, it's impossible to plan for the future healthcare needs of an organization. There's a lot of undiagnosed disease. You know, there's not a significant amount of high volume screening for non-communicable diseases as much as communicable diseases in some of these markets. And when it comes to healthcare service delivery, there's not only a high burden of cost for the equipment itself, but there's a high burden of cost for the consumables. And as I mentioned before, you cannot just take a $20,000 ventilator and take off certain elements of it and strip it of certain functions and make it into a $5,000 ventilator. It just does not work, right? You have to start with a ventilator which was designed to address low middle income, low resource environments and scale it up rather than the other way around. So I mentioned before, COVID we see as a catalyst for what we're thinking. COVID has shown that healthcare can be delivered more remotely, right? COVID has shown that there are a number of instances where nascent technology, which perhaps wasn't that relevant before COVID-19, has suddenly come to the forefront. You know, telemedicine is a great example of that. I think point of care diagnostics, right? Everybody is now scrambling around trying to get an affordable, $5 to $10 COVID test. Previously, that type of technology didn't exist, right? So, in any wartime scenario, I would say, you see a massive shift in the rate of development. Look at the vaccines, right? Nobody would have imagined you could generate a COVID-19 vaccine within a space of a year to 18 months. So we believe that COVID has essentially uncovered, right, a large pent-up demand for remote technology, remote medicine, health education, telemedicine, smart diagnostics. Okay, we're running forward a little bit, but also this concept of clinical decision support, AI-backed whatever, right? AI-backed diagnostics. And by that, I mean taking a relatively dumb technology on a relatively affordable $50 smartphone, connecting it in the back end with very, very smart software, sitting in the cloud, sitting offline in most cases, which is critical in these markets, and suddenly turning a $50 dumb phone into a diagnostic tool. So I've talked about the double disease burden. I think we can go through, please. So going back to those three areas, and I would say that the major challenges in our markets, we believe that enhancing the local workforce is critical. If you were to try and get the number of doctors that's required, for instance, to address all of the healthcare needs for Nigeria, right, and you look at the numbers, it would take 20 years. Right? If you were to be able to find, the ICU nurses to operate all of the ventilators which are required even now, right, during the COVID crisis in most of these markets, it would take us 10 years, right? So the answer is it takes too long, and it's very, very challenging to train up less skilled, less specialist workers into very specialist workers. We believe that one of the solutions for that is to effectively artificially enhance the capability of a less skilled worker by partnering up with smart technologies. And there's many different companies which are doing this right now. In terms of the cost and complexity of delivering healthcare, one great company which we like, which I'm sure you all know, is Prava Health. And Prava Health is a great example of a primary care model in Bangladesh, which has managed to achieve scale in a relatively profitable and affordable manner by enhancing their platform with the use of technology. So instead of Prava Health building 10 primary care clinics and physical bricks and mortar, Prava Health are now looking to effectively create digital health clinics, right, where patients can access healthcare services at a relatively affordable cost. More or less 80% of the service can be delivered electronically or digitally. And when they really need to, they can come to the mothership, they can come to the hub facility or hospital and seek more complex care, right? So in our view, that is a way to scale up the availability of healthcare services at a relatively affordable price point, whilst at the same time, even addressing the first case where you don't have to have then a doctor in every single clinic, right? And then finally, the services which would be out of reach. It's a fact that there are not many $5,000 ventilators in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa. One of the companies which we are discussing a potential investment has developed a affordable ventilator which operates on its own battery backup, which has its own internal oxygen concentrator, and which will basically operate for at least 8 to 24 hours without any power supply available. Right? It also costs around $2,000, $3,000 to manufacture. It is going through FDA testing right now, and it should be hitting the market probably within 18 months. Obviously, because of COVID, they are seeking emergency use authorization from the US FDA, hoping to get to market sooner. But that is a technology which was designed from the first instance to be used in a low middle income economy, right? To be used in a low resource setting. And because of the way in which it's been designed, it's also been designed that you don't require an ICU specialist nurse to operate it, right? Any trained nurse with 2 or 3 years of experience can operate that ventilator. It's semi-automated, it has artificial intelligence, and allows somebody to change the settings, connect remotely to a ICU physician to give advice and instruction. But that is a type of device which completely disrupts the market, right? If you were to take, as I mentioned before, a $50,000 device, which is used in the North American market, and try and turn it into a $5,000 ventilator, it just will not work, right? Many people have tried, many people have failed. So we're taking a very different approach. So I've kind of talked about these. We already have, I've already talked about Prava Health, which is in the middle. I've already talked about the low-cost ventilator, which is at the end. In terms of smartphone-based diagnostic technology, we've seen some very exciting companies. There's many, many companies out there right now who have used COVID as a catalyst, right, to become smarter much quicker. We have at least half a dozen companies which we are currently speaking to and we are potentially going to invest in, who are essentially combining a relatively low bandwidth, simple test, diagnostic test, point of care, sometimes paper-based, sometimes based on using a microscope slide, sometimes based on using a reagent in a test tube. But again, combining a relatively simplistic test with a very smart technology in the back end. So by taking a slide, for instance, with a sample of urine or a sample of blood, suddenly by using a smart algorithm, which is operating on a $50 smartphone, which doesn't have to have a Wi-Fi connection, which doesn't have to have a 3G connection, they can suddenly scan that, that urine sample or that blood sample for around 8 different diseases, right? And give an answer pretty much straight away, right? That is, again, a transformational type of company. We're lucky that COVID has acted as a catalyst for this. Many of these companies are finding their feet and have their first customer base, which is focused on affordable COVID testing. But the beauty of such a technology is when it works for COVID-19, it works for many other infectious diseases and it works for many other non-communicable diseases as well. So I talked a little bit about the team. I would say that we're actually blessed. We're very lucky to have a highly qualified team of people that have real deep industry expertise in healthcare, right? Every single one of the team has healthcare deep experience, including the investment team, including anybody that's an advisor to the fund. And if you look at the profiles of our team, I think it's easy to understand how we have all the tools in place and all the facilities and all the experience to really take a relatively early stage technology. We're not the subject matter experts, we don't pretend to be, but if we find a management team that understands their technology extremely well, has already managed to commercialize that to some extent, has some degree of customer base, we can then pick up that company, do a strategic investment and give them full support, including our network, including our experience of how to do transactions, including opening up our Rolodex of people who may be interested to have a strategic partnership with that company, etc. And as an example, you know, I know most of the CEOs for most of the hospitals in Nairobi, right? And if we have an early stage technology, we know how to get that into 5 hospitals tomorrow, right? Alan, who's on this call, I think, was a very, very senior member of many multinational corporations, including Roche and Bayer and Sanofi, has extensive experience in the consumer health space. And again, you know, we connected him with one of our portfolio companies, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, because they were speaking to one of those multinational corporations about a particular product. And even though he no longer works there, he understands obviously how that company operates and just gave some general advice as to how to potentially structure those conversations. So that type of knowledge is extremely valuable. And I personally feel very honored and lucky to be able to work with so many smart people. And again, we have even smarter people in the next slide. Just as an example, I don't know, many of you may know, apart from our Stop TB team, Dr. Harold Nusser, who was a very senior person within Novartis, who essentially run the social business in Novartis for many years. We have Craig Nagakawa, who was previously working for the Global Good Ventures, which was essentially Bill Gates's private investment or lab. His sole purpose when he was working for Intellectual Ventures and Global Good was the innovation and taking small companies and scaling them up and finding them partners, doing the business development, structuring the deals. And his job was basically to take technology which had reached a certain inflection point to team them up with a larger organization that can then take that through the next inflection point. And he had many successful exits as a result. So that's a lot about Heal. I hope it's been useful, and I'm very happy to take any questions.
So just to iterate, and I apologize, I'm having the worst Wi-Fi laptop issues ever because my mother tried to disinfect my laptop while I was in LA and she melted some components. Anyway, but I'm not the token Asian on this team. I kick ass. So I just want to make sure that I clarify that. But I think, okay, look, we have questions already from our colleagues. So is StopT Partnership providing the catalytic capital for the HEAL Fund? We are not. We are actually helping to raise the catalytic capital from traditional donors, from private foundations, from private sector companies. So we are helping in that respect. Where we come into play is with the technical support. So I think I can announce publicly that we will be receiving funding from the Korean government to provide the technical support necessary to optimally and rapidly roll out some of these solutions to the countries and communities and people that we are trying to serve. And that will be another, VIS that we host, but we are definitely helping the HEAL Fund raise that funding because we talk a lot and we give a lot of lip service to unlocking capital from the private sector. But unlocking capital from the private and institutional investors requires certain risks to be taken. We are definitely helping to mitigate those risks. So I hope I have answered that question. Stuart, maybe you want to answer Lloyd's question about geographic? Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of our target geographies for the HEAL Fund, as I mentioned, we are healthcare specific. We're not entirely geographically agnostic, but we don't have a specific country focus. Primarily, we're looking at low middle income economies. And by that, we define as, right now, at least within our sphere of current companies, primarily looking at sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and by that I mean generally India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and Latin America. We have some scope to invest outside of those geographies, but the primary reason we've limited ourselves right now for those is because we want to have a manageable portfolio. And in terms of the size of the investment, as I mentioned before, we can go slightly lower in the size of the investment. In terms of whether we would invest in a pre-revenue company or a company which really is very early stage, I think it depends on risk. Right? We're not the type of fund that will be investing, let's say, in R&D. Right? We're not going to be investing in a pharmaceutical company, right, or a biotechnology company that is ahead of an inflection point, such as an FDA approval, right, or a clinic or a phase 2 to 3 trial, for instance, right. Our point is we are looking for companies that we can help to scale from pre-profitability, past profitability, to achieve a certain size. Right? And what those companies look like if they have an extremely strong customer base, but they're still perhaps in pilot mode, right? But behind that pilot mode, there's a significant, pent-up demand where if the pilot is successful, they have already signed, pre-authorization deals with certain companies or certain institutions. We would be happy to look at that. And I hope that answers the question.
And, people on the call should feel free to raise their hand and unmute themselves and ask the questions directly. But I think a couple of things I want to emphasize is, we talk a lot about, primary care, community-based, and I think all of that is clearly important. But what COVID-19, at least personally, has shown me is that care can be provided at the home. Like I literally have 5 COVID-19 antigen tests sitting on my desk right now. And I don't know why that can't be applied for other diseases as well. And I think home-based care solutions will come from the innovators, particularly the SMEs and the startups, from not only the high-income markets, but in this situation, if we're talking about TB-affected countries, they have to come from the TB-affected countries themselves. And the type of support they need from a financing perspective and from the technical support perspective is very steep. And this is what we're trying to actually overcome. But I think we have some really interesting people on this call. And Lorenzo, hey, do you mind? I know you and whatnot. Do you mind asking your question verbally to just mix this up a little bit?
Sure, with pleasure. Thank you so much for the conversation and very interesting insights. So Lorenzo from HedgeCollab we run a program here in Geneva where we support tech for good companies in different fields, coming from all over the world to scale. My question was about more in the investment side. So since I'm usually supporting entrepreneurs with the fundraising effort and everything, in several conversations with investors, this is something that is very important to know from the entrepreneur and founder's perspective. Like as a typical VC, like do you take board seats when you invest? And also if you prefer to lead rounds or to be a follower investors?
Yeah. So look, I think in terms of the board seat, generally, yes, if it's, because it's going to be these are going to be companies where they're not too big that's an issue, right? I mean, we're not looking, I can tell you, we're not trying to take a heavy-handed board seat, right? We're not interested in running the company, right? We're interested in supporting the company. And that's why we specifically will not take majority stakes, right? And we're only ever going to do minority stakes, right? Our aim is really to take successful companies and, as they say, ride on the coattails of success, right? And help those companies through the next level of growth, right? In terms of being a lead investor versus a follow-on investor or syndicating the round, I think it very much depends on the company and the size of the round. I mean, there's a couple of potential investments which we would do, which even though they've only recently done Series A, their Series B may well be $100 million, right? And so since we're only going to put in $5 million, we're never going to be the lead investor. There are other companies who perhaps only have a round of 10 million, right? And maybe we will take 4 to 5 million. So by default, we become the dominant investor. And also there are some companies who are speaking to funds which don't really have healthcare domain expertise. They're more just financial investors. They don't really want to invest as strategic investors. They just want to put in money. And they are looking for an investor that has healthcare domain expertise that can add that bandwidth. And they've basically said to the portfolio companies, okay, if you can find a healthcare specific focused fund to come in, right? Even if we don't lead financially the round, we would be the lead investor from a kind of strategic and a impact perspective, right? So we would be the ones who, even if we have a smaller investment in the round, we would be primarily responsible for helping those other investors to ensure that we're doing what's necessary to make the company successful.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
No problem.
So because we have Alan and Dorji, and we have some great people who we work really closely with, like WHO and others. And Dennis, I know you're on, and Sahu, who's our deputy ED, is also on. And some of the innovators that we've been working with, the one thing, and this is where I would love to get and I guess I'm trying to get answers from the experts here who have actually worked in these markets, like Stuart and Alan and Dorji, is I do wonder, the markets we're trying to enter, it requires at least some baseline ICT infrastructure in place. And one of the questions we come up, we run into a lot, and Andrew and Kelly, please jump in here, is this whole question around in-country server versus cloud hosting for the data. And it would be really great to get your thoughts on what kind of, if you've run into that same issue and how you dealt with it.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that, but I don't want to take all the airtime. But if you want me to, I will, Jackie. So, I mean, I think there's a regulatory issue and there's a practical operational issue, Jackie. And from a regulatory standpoint, typically in some of these geographies, they require data to be hosted locally in the target market, right, in the home country, right? And by that I mean any data which is potentially sensitive, so medical records, for instance. In other geographies, perhaps the regulatory scheme is less sophisticated or less developed. And right now they haven't addressed that question, but I would hesitate to say that in the future, that will also be a requirement, right? So there is a need to have a certain degree of local infrastructure and local server and local data centers in some cases. And in other cases, it's very possible to keep less sensitive anonymized data in the cloud. But of course, that relies on a decent network and a decent tech solution. The solutions which we are focused on, and I think are increasingly starting to come out of the woodwork, they don't require, as I said, necessarily a huge amount of online capability. That the basic function of the technology can work offline. There is obviously the assumption that a certain amount of that data can be stored locally in a hard drive or stored in a phone memory, etc. And then when that device is connected to the cloud, or when that device is connected to Wi-Fi, then the data and the information can be uploaded, right, and synchronized. But specifically with regards to data security, data management, part of it depends on the local market requirements and the regulatory requirements, and part of it depends on where is this company geographically placed. If it's a rural company in India, outside of a tier 3 city, then perhaps they need to think more about local connectivity, right? As a smaller part of it, and cloud-based as a larger part of it. But typically there needs to be a combination of both. And I think Alan maybe was going to add to that as well.
Yes, Alan, please.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart and Jackie. Maybe just to build on that point, and particularly the regulatory point, during my last role, I also happened to be the chairman of our Global Industry Association, the Global Self-Care Federation, which is aligned with the WHO. And we've been working very closely with the African Union and particularly the regulatory authorities to see if there was a way that we could try to build some sort of harmonized approach to the use of data, management of data. Of course, it's a very sensitive topic because you're clearly dealing with very important privacy matters. So you have to make sure that whatever the technology that you're using does allow you to anonymize the data. But I think there's not yet clarity, particularly amongst the regulators, about the benefits that can come by utilizing that data in a way to drive efficiencies, to drive better outcomes for patients. So it was interesting. We were seen by WHO as a kind of natural curator of the discussion around the use of health data, not just in Africa, but globally. And we had also been able to attract a number of the larger tech companies who are all very interested in developing their healthcare options and products. So along with industry members, key stakeholders, regulators, and some of the technology companies, I think there is a momentum building to try to drive harmonization around how health data can be stored and then used in a way that protects the individual's data health records. So I just wanted to mention that because there's a lot of activity going on right now.
And can I just add also, there's a little bit of a skepticism, of course, and as to who wants to access that data, right? I mean, I'm sure in particular, there are some of our companies which we are looking at who perhaps have been approached by pharmaceutical companies, right? Or contract research organizations or institutions where, the majority of people would not want their data to be shared, right? And maybe there's some sensitivities around that. But interestingly, the flip side is in many of these markets, when we have tried to get permissions and ask patients, are they happy to share their data? If we tell them that it could be part of a future research trial or something which will enable us to have more accurate, let's say, therapeutic solutions, which are more specific to the sub-Saharan African population, right, or the South Asian population, they're typically happy to allow us to use that data, right? Because in the end, it benefits everyone. And I personally have gone through this when we've done large screening programs for NCDs, for instance, and I've been very surprised at how open people are to utilizing their data, as long as it's anonymized, right? And as long as it's stored in a protected environment.
No, and I think this shows the breadth and experience of the HEAL team, where this is literally some of the things we talk about amongst ourselves and trying to solve for, because I think, in order to really bring these solutions, to to the countries and communities, people who need them. These are clearly things that we need to really think about. But maybe I can take a step backward, and you know, I hope folks continue to put questions in the chat box or raise their hands. Is the other thing I've noticed, Stuart, is that some of the innovators we work with would prefer to just get traditional donor funding. It's kind of scary to get VC funding. And we have run into that hesitancy. And so maybe you can demystify why VC funding shouldn't be seen as scary. But actually, you know, I mean, it's in my opinion, it's quite necessary. So maybe you can help demystify that for us.
Yeah, look, I mean, if I go back, Jackie, to the, what do people think about venture capital? Stressful, you know, money. Yes, I mean, it's money, right? There's no getting away from it. I mean, you know, companies that want to scale, they generally need capital, but they need capital which is backed with expertise and some skills, right? And I can understand why certainly some entrepreneurs and some startup companies are afraid of taking private equity money or venture capital money, because there's lots of horror stories out there, right? There's lots of stories of venture capitalists or private equity firms, you know, sticking in money and then coming up with unrealistic expectations as to how quickly the company can grow, who perhaps are not aligned with the vision of the organization, who, you know, are making decisions because they're in a controlling position, let's say, which is, you know, and they're squeezing out the management teams. We've all heard the horror stories. There has been some challenges historically, always with any investment, because there's, you know, you have finance people that understand their world, and you have entrepreneurs that understand their world, and perhaps there's a little bit of a lost in translation. Now, you know, one of the ways in which we're trying to approach that differently, that is why we have such a deep bench, I would say, in terms of operating partners. So Alan, Doge, you know, Craig, etc., plus the people from the Bamboo team, plus yourselves, right, including the Stop TB partnership. You know, we're trying to harmonize the expertise and the interests by not just being a bunch of finance people, right, who are going out and throwing money at companies. That's not our intention. And frankly, as far as I'm concerned, we are trying to drive companies into the next level of growth because we all believe in the mission, right? And the mission is everybody that's part of this team believes there's a dire need to improve healthcare service delivery and access to healthcare in low middle income economies. We would not be here if we didn't care about it, right? But we see and we believe that the way in which we're approaching it is the right way, right? Bringing commercial capital combined with donor capital is the right way to build successful companies, right? And at the end of the day, we are held to account for the financial performance by our commercial investors, right? Which means that there is a degree of sitting with the investees and saying, okay, we need to be successful. And for us to be successful, you need to be successful. And how do we make you successful, right? Whatever is required, right? And sometimes it may be that we have companies who we literally don't need to do anything. I mean, they are more commercially savvy than we are, right? They know how to get customers. They know their markets way better than we do, right? We're not going to add any value by telling them how to go and get customers, right? But they may not know people in the big companies which we know, right? Or they may not know anybody in India when they're sitting in Kenya, or they may know nobody in Nigeria when they're sitting in Zimbabwe, right? But if we can, through our network and our connectivity, introduce them in a friendly way, right? In a friendly manner and say, look, these guys are really cool. Their technology is cool. It's been proven. We think there's an interesting angle perhaps in the Nigerian country because you know, there's 200 million people, right? These guys are sitting in a country maybe with only 8 million people. If they're successful in a country with 8 million people, imagine what they can do in a country with 200 million people, right? And that's basically our job, right? So the difference, I think, with Bamboo and our approach is it's very much a collaborative approach. There is no intention to come and destroy company value. There's no intention to kind of come in with our big size 12 boots and start kicking people around, right? We just want to help them to go through those pain points because in many instances we've been there, right? We know what it's like, right? And frankly, you know, I really take off my hat to most entrepreneurs because, you know, it's very, very tough job. It's a tough gig, especially when you have a family to support, right? Especially when you're living in markets which are very challenging markets to operate in. You know, we have the benefit of being in more developed countries, let's say, where the regulatory framework is more sophisticated. You know, the ease of doing business is there. So we don't try and judge people for maybe some of the challenges which they're experiencing in their target markets. We try to help them and lead them through those hurdles and take them to the next level.
No, that's fantastic. And I have some follow-up, questions and comments on that, but I want to give the floor to Kelly. Kelly, please.
Thanks, Jackie. And thanks for a great presentation. This has been really informative. I just had a question for you around, the potential butting heads of the financial ROI versus the impact, especially in emerging markets. And I wonder if you run into that at all, and if you do, how do you overcome that, both as sort of on the entrepreneur side and also on the VC side?
Yeah, I mean, I have before, which is why when we've sat on the impact KPIs and when we thought about the impact framework, right? As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we haven't just selected a parallel set of KPIs for impact, which have no relevance to the success of the business, right? As much as possible, 80 to 90% of the KPIs we selected from an impact perspective also determine the success of the company as a healthcare company, right? So the example which I gave, if you are a diabetes company, or if you are a company, let's say, that is focused on TB, right? And you're an AI-backed radiology solution, which has had great success and great funding, and I'm sure Jackie knows the company I'm talking about, and your KPI is to deliver diagnostic capability. So, your diagnostic capability of reading chest X-rays, high throughput, has to be 95%, right? That works as an impact KPI because it means that in 95% of the cases, you get the diagnosis right? And the patient has the right diagnosis, and you're reducing the error rate in measuring chest X-rays. And frankly, some of these technologies are better than a radiologist. And so we feel I would rather the chest X-ray for a patient being read by something which is 99% accurate than a human being who's only 90% accurate. We're not trying to replace jobs, but we're trying to help and augment that radiologist to basically be slightly better than they were before. But we would also use that as a commercial KPI. And it's also a relevant KPI to the company because if they show success in the accuracy of their chest X-ray reading, more people will want to buy the product, right? More people will want to use the technology platform. So I think the answer is to sit realistically with the management teams, take our own impact framework, layer that on, rather than take a generic set of impact KPIs applied to every single company, make them very specific to each company, right? Agree with the management team why they make sense from a commercial as much as an operational, as much as an impact perspective. And then, as I said before, we're not having to have an entirely different framework. I don't know if that makes sense.
Maybe I can just add a couple of points from having done my due diligence before joining the Bamboo team. Of course, impact is becoming a very trendy topic amongst many investors and funds, and everybody's demanding a certain amount of ESG compliance or measurement. But I think a lot of people are actually playing lip service to that. They're using UN SDG symbols on their materials and saying, yes, because we're in healthcare, we must be an impact player. But in reality, when you look at it, it's just a financial investment, and they're still looking for very, very aggressive returns. What we're seeing here, and I was the one who put the 25% in the comment box because that's the traditional kind of VC level return rates. And of course, what we're looking at is much less than that. We're looking at more in the kind of the mid-teens level of returns for the senior tranche investors. Of course, we also hope that we're able to deliver those kinds of returns to our first loss investors as well. But in reality, when you look at the caliber of what Bamboo Capital have done historically in terms of their impact scores, the awards they've been given, the seriousness with which they take it within the company. They have a chief impact officer. Each of the funds will have an impact committee as well as the investment committee. So they really take it very seriously, but they also try to do it in a way that doesn't overburden the portfolio companies. And that's again where the advisors and the team can help the portfolio companies make that important criteria come to life. And that's important not just for the funds during the fund life, but also, potentially it makes these companies much more attractive when they come to the next phase of their development, whether that be, going public or being sold on to a strategic buyer, or maybe even going into a bigger, more commercial fund for bigger investment levels later on. So as I say, I think the quality of what Bamboo does really speaks to the combination of both financial and impact returns. Because the other thing that we are clear about is that sustainability drives impact. So if you have a great impact in the first year and then you disappear, that's 1 year of impact. Whereas if you're able to sustain that over 10 years, of course, you're going to have much better impact ratios.
Yep.
No, Alan, thanks so much. And this is like why I love having you on my calls and webinars, et cetera. But, you know, I know I'm mindful of the time, and clearly I think this is like not the end of the conversation. But, you know, Sahu, since you're on the line, you know, it'd be great if you could maybe comment on, you know, what COVID-19 has taught us and why it is really critical that, you know, at least from the TB perspective, we look at these multi-disease solutions and tools. And, you know, if you comment on that, that would be great before we close.
You know, Jackie, thanks. Yes, I'm happy to say something on that. So it was a great presentation and discussion. I'm not a financial expert, nor on venture capital, hold any views. But just to point out one thing that Jackie said now, COVID has changed our world in many ways. It has changed also probably what I was listening to in terms of impact and what is impact, and also what is innovation, and what is a timeline to innovation. We were witness to within 10 months, vaccines getting developed from nowhere and getting into people's arm. That's the kind of speed and timeline and innovation that happened. And if you see the data for COVID, it has been increasing every day in the world, right? Countries are going through second waves, third waves. So what is impact? It is, you know, sometimes in health, you will have to measure impact in the absence of intervention, right? And that becomes an estimate or so how many people more would have died if people would not have masked, right? So that becomes a very, you know, estimate, and, you know, some people will have to do some modeling, and it's not easy to measure. So, so I think a lot of things have changed, but in TB, we have seen two kinds of big picture impact. One is a dramatic impact on people not getting access to care. As a result, about 1.4 million people less were diagnosed and treated for TB in 2020. And in some countries, quite a lot. So that was a kind of negative side of it, and a lot of things connected to it. There was a positive side of it, which is that a lot of innovations happened, and a lot of new ways of delivering care that probably people thought would never be possible in the next few years is possible now. And I think that has opened up a lot of things for us to think, and all stakeholders, partners, and countries to think about how they can continue to deliver care in a manner that is innovative and different from what it was in the past. So I think that's a great learning. A lot of things have happened on digital technology in health. A lot of things have happened on diagnosis in health. And I think those things are great things to now look at. Can we use some of the learnings there and scale it up? And in that, you, of course, you will need some funding, right? And I must say that we have also struggled in the last few months with some new technology to scale it up, and funding has become an issue, you know. And then it becomes a chicken and egg, because if you don't, if you have a product and if you don't sell enough, you don't get enough money, so you don't have capacity to produce more. So I think that should be easy to solve if there is a demand for it. But somehow in the area of TB, we have not been able to do that. So I think it's great to listen to what Bamboo Capital has to offer. And it's from Stop2B, we are very excited to be a partner in this, and any support in our expertise in our area of knowledge will be great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sal. So Rafa, if you can move to the next slide. I'm going to give Stuart the final opportunity to say some inspirational words. Actually, can you show the slide where we have the next lineup? No, sorry. Yes, here. Perfect. So, just going to what like Stuart and Alan and Sahu mentioned, these are some of the solutions that we are looking at that we think can really bring care to people's homes. And so, we will send out information about these webinars in the coming days, and you should follow us on Twitter to get the details. But here are some of the solutions that we're looking at. But with that said, Stuart, any closing comments before I say adieu to everybody?
No, just to say thank you, Jackie. And we're not that scary, right? If any of the entrepreneurs that are joining this want to have a chat, we're available. I'm happy for Jackie to share my email address. For anybody that's interested to join us on our journey with regards to the fund, then please again reach out. And glad to have the opportunity to talk about what's a pretty exciting future.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Thank you so much to you, to everyone from Bamboo who joined, for everyone who joined today. I think this is going to be a game changer. What we're trying to do is not easy. It is definitely hard, I can tell you, and my husband also knows directly the stress I go through every day, and I have become a functional alcoholic, but I shouldn't really say that in a recorded video. But I think what we're trying to do is really going to change how we approach global health going forward, and I'm really excited about it. And then anyone who wants to reach out to Bamboo, please reach out to this email address. I check it every day, and then we will make sure we make the appropriate connection. So with that said, thank you so much for your participation. This is a really great event, and see you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Bye-bye. Take care. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining.